Hello, my name is Matt Bernhardt. I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan, and I'm here to talk to you today about a new type of voting equipment called the ballot marking device. This is work I did in conjunction with my co-authors, Allison McDonald, Henry Mang, Jensen Hua, Nakul Bajaj, Kevin Chang, and my thesis advisor, Alex Halderman. So what is a ballot marking device? A BMD is a computerized interface in which voters can mark their preferred choices on a screen, typically a touch screen, and then their choices are printed out on paper that they can review before they cast it. Ballot marking devices are extraordinarily popular across the United States, being used in nearly every state, and their popularity is only on the rise. The security model for BMDs looks something a little bit like this. On the left, the voters make their selections, the ballot gets printed out, they then have the opportunity to review the printed ballot to make sure that it's correct, and then deposit it in the scanner. The election results are tabulated, and then the paper ballots are audited, and that the results of that audit are compared against the reported results from the scanners. There's sort of two attacks against ballot marking device systems. You can attack the scanner, which would cause the reported results that the tabulation system produces to be incorrect, but this is fairly easily defeated with a post-election audit. And once auditors looked at enough paper, they would be able to see that the outcome reported was not correct, and then a full hand recount would be done to completely thwart the attack. The other way to attack a BMD is by compromising the touchscreen or the printer, so that the paper that gets printed out doesn't show the results or doesn't show the vote that the voter intended to cast. You'll note here that the paper trail is now compromised, so any post-election audit would confirm the wrong result. Even though the voters wanted to vote one way, the computer system would still tabulate it the other way, and a post-election audit wouldn't catch this. But in principle, this is a trivially defeated attack, so long as voters review their ballot printouts before putting them in the scanner. Although we don't actually know how voters behave in this situation. It's unclear whether they check their ballots at a high enough rate to provide any kind of security. And that's what we wanted to study. Many have been speculating that ballot marking devices are fundamentally insecure. In particular, Philip Stark has speculated that voters are not likely to check their ballots on their own. And not only that, but that they lack the cognitive ability to remember everything they wanted to vote for and notice problems on the ballot. And prior work on voting equipment supports this. Work done out of Rice University and the Caltech voting project in the mid-2000s looked at both review screens on electronic voting machines as well as paper tapes produced by direct recording electronic voting machines, and both found that people had trouble verifying and detecting when changes were introduced to the paper trail. However, other work in other domains, for example, in phishing or certificate warnings, suggests that there are warnings we can provide voters that will improve their ability to verify that their choices were correctly recorded. And that's what we really wanted to study. We wanted to first characterize the way, whether people do this thing or not, and then also find ways to improve it, which leads me to our research questions, which are, first of all, as the title of the talk in the paper is, can voters do this thing? Can they detect errors introduced on the paper ballot? And are there interventions that can improve the rate at which people detect? To support these two questions, we came up with several other research questions. For example, does the ballot style matter? And I'll explain more about that in a second. Does the candidate position on the ballot matter? So if I'm an attacker, I probably only care about the president or the Senate or the state legislature races. I probably don't care about Ann Arbor dog catcher. So if voters are more likely to notice that I changed a race higher up on the ballot, that's bad for me. That constrains my attack surface. We wanted to know, does the type of manipulation matter? Again, if I'm this surreptitious attacker that wants to stay undetected, if there is a particular kind of way I can manipulate people's votes that makes it harder for them to detect, that's good news for me. And finally, we wanted to characterize how sensitive voters are to the warnings to see what kind of flexibility we have in rolling out policy recommendations about ballot marking devices. To answer these questions, we ran a between subjects study with 241 participants in Ann Arbor. You can see here that the Ann Arbor District Library was super helpful in providing a location for us to run our mock election. The great thing about this particular room is that the actual 2018 midterms in Ann Arbor were held in this room, as will the 2020 general. And you can see our general polling place setup. The voters come in on the left, they fill out a IRB consent form, then they move to the machines in the back and vote. And then they take their printed ballots and deposit them in the scanner on the right. After they voted, they also took a short exit survey. To provide an even more realistic election environment, we wanted to use real voting machines. So we took, on the left, an AccuVote TSX voting machine, which is a direct recording electronic voting machine that is still set to be used in 2020, and hacked its firmware so that we could print a paper ballot corresponding to our participants' selections, as you can see by the printer below the machine. On the right, we hacked an AccuVote OS scanner, which again will also be used in the 2020 elections, to scan people's ballots. I mentioned that one of our questions was about ballot style. To provide more realism for our mock election, we used a truncated version of the Ann Arbor 2018 midterm ballot. We basically took the first 13 races on the ballot, and that was more for time constraints and paper constraints. And you can see on the left is the actual ballot style that people voted in 2018. The only modification we made was the barcodes at the top, but otherwise it looks exactly like a hand-marked ballot that you would have filled out here in Ann Arbor in 2018. On the right is a ballot summary card, which you can see is a much more compact form of representing the voter selections. It basically just lists the race and the candidate that the voter voted for. And there's been some discussion about which of these two formats will provide a better, more verifiable ballot. Some thinking that the increased information in the ballot on the left would make it harder, some thinking that the decreased information on the right would make it harder. So that's one of our research questions. On every single ballot, we opted to manipulate one race that a voter participated in. The races were selected at random, and we could either deselect a choice, we could move a vote from candidate A to candidate B, or we could introduce a choice if the voter didn't make a mark. To answer our research questions, we ran a battery of 9 experiments to evaluate which particular factors impact detection. 2 of our experiments were about ballot style that I already sort of discussed. Another experiment was about deselecting a candidate on the ballot rather than moving that mark to a different candidate. Again, under the assumption that if you're particularly invested in a candidate, you might be more likely to notice when a different candidate in the race you care about was chosen. We also looked at 3 sets of poll worker instructions to evaluate how sensitive voters were to particular warnings that we could give them.